The bank called at 5:26 a.m. to ask whether I had authorized a $62,000 wire from a home equity line I didn't even know existed. While I stood barefoot in our kitchen in Folsom, staring at the green glow of the microwave clock and the pale rectangle of our backyard through the slider, an email landed with a PDF of a signature that looked like mine except for a leftward slant I've never had. The same minute, the Ring app stacked a thumbnail on the timeline, a Highlander backing out at 2:41 a.m. with the fogging exhaust turning lower, even though my wife was supposed to be on a night shift at Mercy General. I didn't say anything out loud. The house was quiet in that pre-dawn way where the refrigerator's hum feels like an accusation. Our daughter was asleep on the other side of the wall surrounded by glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there last summer. The dog's collar tag ticked once when he lifted his head, then silence again, like he too was waiting to see whether I'd move. I set the phone face down and watched my own reflection in the slider, the shadow of a man still wearing yesterday's hoodie. In that reflection I looked like someone who had been sleepwalking for months and finally bumped his shoulder into the doorframe. I ran an e-commerce side business that grew out of doing home renovation jobs for neighbors and small landlords, cabinet refacing, backsplash installs, floating shelves, the kinds of projects that live between YouTube tutorials and contractors that never call back. I photographed the results and move inventory hardware, custom pulls, reclaimed woodcuts on a Shopify store I set up with too much caffeine and a stubborn streak. I learned to plan around deliveries and school pickup, around seasonal sales and strange customer messages at midnight, around whatever my wife's ICU schedule looked like posted on the hallway corkboard. I tried to think of it as choreography rather than compromise. She liked to joke that between her charting and my shipping labels our house ran on barcodes. We bought the two-story on Blue Ravine with the idea that the stairs meant future kids would someday thunder up and down them. We painted the banister the week we moved in and ate takeout on the cardboard that had protected the floors. My commute landmarks still feel like souvenirs: the Folsom Dam Road, the sign for Lemby Park, the Safeway on East Bidwell where I can navigate by skid marks from carts. On bad days, I pace the aisles under the fluorescent hum and end up buying nothing, just letting the routine cool me down. She worked nights, sometimes days, sometimes strings of both, when some ICU emergency demanded overtime. Night shifts made textbooks out of the morning light. She would come home pale and wide, smelling like hospital soap and coffee. I built quiet into the routine: blackout curtains in our room, a fan for white noise, an afternoon check-in text asking whether she wanted a burrito or sleep. Money always mattered even when it wasn't a fight. The energy bill climbed every summer with the air conditioner grinding away. Our daughter's asthma flared once a year and those guys' co-pays weren't theoretical. My truck developed electrical gremlins no mechanic could exercise without a pound of flesh. I took extra installs, she took extra shifts. We covered her mother's root canal 2 years ago without telling anyone because pride is a private sport. We kept telling ourselves that the fat part of the cove would arrive soon, that the corner we were turning was real. It was easy to believe that if we both just white-knuckle a little longer, we'd be celebrating on Folsom Lake with pizza and cheap champagne and the sun slanting just right. There were red flags long before the call, but red flags wear makeup when you love someone. I started noticing mileage on the Highlander that didn't match routes I recognized. The car smelled faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, a sharp citrus that stuck to the fabric even after I cracked the windows. The laundry hamper would be missing her scrubs but hold a t-shirt with a logo I didn't recognize for a gym she never mentioned. We had a shared Life 360 circle on our phones that used to feel cute and protective. It turned muddy at odd hours, a drift rather than a dot. It's easy to say now that I knew. But knowing has a lot of stage fright when the rest of your life depends on not knowing. I did small, pathetic investigations that embarrassed me even while I did them. I checked our fast-track toll statements to see whether the car had tagged a bridge when we had no reason to leave the county. I compared the posted Mercy schedule on the corkboard to the text she sent me about last-minute swaps. I counted Apple Watch steps on days she claimed to have slept straight through and found a 10,000 step gap. I told myself that maybe she paced at night in the unit, that maybe the cologne was from a patient husband who hugged everyone out of bad news, that maybe I was becoming the guy whose brain is a browser with too many tabs. When I tried to bring it up gently, she would look tired in that way only nurses can look, a mixture of compassion and steel, and ask me to trust the judgment she uses to keep people alive. And then I would feel like a petty person comparing bar grass to ventilators. When the bank called, the petty person disappeared. A wire is a wire, a signature is a signature. The email included an address that wasn't ours for the notary acknowledgement, the UPS store on Oak Avenue Pkwy, and a timestamp that sat out there like an anchor at 7:13 p.m. 2 nights earlier. I looked at our shift calendar. It said she was on day shift until 7 and would drive straight home to tuck our daughter in. I opened the Ring app and scrolled backward. At 7:31 p.m. I watched our front door camera catch the edge of a shoulder carrying a brown paper bag, just enough to tell height and the edge of our welcome mat, but not a face. I let the video loop. The dog didn't bark on the clip, which he always does for me. He barks and then tail thumps once like a drum. The silence bothered me more than anything. I pulled copies of our credit reports. The fraud alert button felt like pressing a fire alarm under glass. A new line sat there with a credit limit of $20,000 under her maiden name opened months ago with statements going to a paper box at the main post office. The first charge was to Auburn Oaks Apartments for an application fee. More charges, a storage unit at Public Storage on East Bidwell, a boutique gym in Rowville, a recurring charge to an email address I didn't recognize with a domain that suggested some kind of encrypted messaging service. I froze every joint card I could freeze from my phone and moved half the checking balance into a separate account at Golden One because fear is a better motivator than shame. I told myself I would explain it as protecting the family from a clear threat rather than a declaration of war. A Wells Fargo case number stared back at me from the email footer, WFFR D-925-11,864. The next twist arrived almost politely. The babysitter we use sometimes on weekends, a college kid who lives across Greenback Lane, responded to a text about a Friday I thought we'd need. The text bubble appeared and then paused and then came back with a careful confession that she had seen a man leaving our driveway last week at almost 2 in the morning when she was unloading groceries from her trunk. She had recognized the car not as mine but as someone's BMW with a temporary plate sticker. She even described the way he reversed without turning his lights on until he reached the street. She apologized for not saying anything earlier. She said she thought I knew. I thanked her and my thumb shook over the keyboard and I sat there like someone blinking into an unexpected flashlight beam. I drove to the UPS store when it opened and asked whether they had a notary. It was the same counter I've shipped returns from, the same rack of novelty envelopes. I had the clerk print the notary's journal page that included my name and an ID number that wasn't my driver's license. She looked nervous, as if she had accidentally stepped into a family murder mystery she wanted no part of. She took a Polaroid-style photo the notary keeps for compliance, she said, and slid it to me in a manila folder. The photo captured a profile, and I could tell immediately that the man who signed my name wasn't me. The jaw, the haircut, the tiny scar at the corner of the eyebrow. She whispered that sometimes people look different in photos, and I nodded because she needed me to nod. I asked if anyone else was with him and she said, slowly, that my wife had stood off to the side and held a coffee. My stomach dropped in a way that felt textbook. I read somewhere that trauma makes your peripheral vision go black, and it did. When I got home, I set everything on our dining table as if laying out instructions, the printed wire, the notary page, the case number. I opened a Word doc and wrote a memo to myself that would eventually go to my lawyer because the internet says you should document everything when you're about to be gaslighted into not knowing what day it is. I went room by room and took photos of what felt relevant. The spare key hook near the back door was empty. The laundry hamper contained another shirt with the same gym logo. The drawer where we keep the passports contained only mine and our daughter's. The basement corner with the Rubbermaid bins had a gap where a bin of old nursing textbooks used to sit. We had replaced our thermostat with a Nest last winter, and I pulled up the history. The system had been set to eco mode between 12 and 3 a.m. every night for the past week, as if someone had turned it off to keep the dog from barking at the HVAC kicking on while moving around downstairs. I typed up a written notice of intent to do a DNA test through LabCorp on Iron Point Road because the credit pull also showed a charge for removal of a contraceptive implant months earlier when I had been told it was still in place. It felt cruel to doubt my own kid when the freckles on her nose match mine, but I've learned that you either put things on paper or you drown later under the weight of your own politeness. I sent the notice by certified mail to our own house because process matters, and I wanted a paper trail of everything that came next. The USP tracking number felt obscene. I added it to the document anyway. I didn't choose a dramatic confrontation in a doorway. Life chose it for me. The date had been set for our daughter's 7th birthday picnic at Lembye Park weeks before any of this, and I had no idea how to cancel joy. The grandparents flew up from Orange County, her brother drove in from Davis, our neighbours planned to swing by with their kids after morning sock. The balloons bobbed against the park shelter roof and the Costco sheet cake sat under a cardboard lid. She arrived smiling and brittle in a way that made me want to cry and break something at the same time. The kids ran to the splash pad and the adults made circles under the trees. I stacked plates and napkins and then felt a strange stillness I later learned is the moment a person decides to stop acting in a play. I took out the folder and placed it on the pivot table between the melon and the chips. I said, calmly and audibly enough for the people in our circle to hear, that I needed to show something important that impacted our home and our finances. I summarized the bank call and the notary. I did not look at her while I spoke. I watched my father-in-law's hands fold in on themselves and my mother-in-law make a small sound. Our neighbour, a civil engineer who knows more about concrete than text, stared at the notary page and then at me with a sober recognition that scared me more than yelling would have. I said that I had already frozen our joint cards and moved funds because I was advised to protect the mortgage from further unauthorized draws. I gave the bank case number and the fact that I had a consultation scheduled with a family attorney in Sacramento with an initial matter number already assigned in their system because big law firms take the administrative part of life and make it real in ink. There is no way to describe how a person's face moves through a series of expressions when their private life becomes public geometry. I watched sadness and rage and pleading flicker like a slideshow. She said words and the words fell flat for me because I had decided to translate everything into action items. She said she had explanations for everything but couldn't remember them all now. She said our daughter's birthday wasn't the time for this. She said a lot of things. My neighbor's wife put a hand on my daughter's shoulder and steered her toward the bubble one table like a Hollywood extra walking a child actor off a live set. My mother-in-law employed the tone she used to convince toddlers to sit and eat the carrots. I realized how much of family life is stage management. Reveal folded into reveal, and I didn't have to go digging for some of them. The neighbor I've helped hang cabinets for twice walked up with a face like someone who had just remembered something he should have told me earlier. He pulled me aside and told me about his morning runs along our street and the time he saw a BMW idling near our driveway at 1 in the morning on a Tuesday. He thought it was a DoorDash mix-up and had mentally shrugged at the time. He added, to his credit, that he remembered because the car had unusual wheel rims that caught the streetlight in a way he'd noticed. People think witnesses remember faces, they usually remember wheels. She floated the explanation that the HELOC was to help cover a surprise bill for her mother and that she had intended to tell me but wanted to avoid worrying me. The numbers on the credit report disagreed with this almost elegantly, a row of line items to Auburn Oaks to a storage unit to a gym to a messaging service. She said that the wire was a temporary transfer and would be reversed. The bank email had no such suggestion, only the crisp note about the wire being completed with no recall requests on file. She said that her colleague at Mercy had been in a dark place and she had been helping him move out of a bad situation, lending her name to utilities until he secured his own. The name Auburn Oaks returned like an echo. The only time we had been in Auburn recently was for a pumpkin patch visit where our kid posed with a scarecrow that looked like it had seen things. That night, after the party, I drove to public storage with the code I had found in a note inside the Highlander's center console, one of those numbers people jot without meaning to cheat because they don't yet know what they're going to use them for. The unit opened easily and smelled like cardboard years. Inside, I found a second coffee maker still in its box, a plastic tote of clothes I didn't recognize, and a binder of lease applications with her name and a man's name as co-applicants. There was a Walgreens photo sleeve with candid pictures of a living room I had never seen but that contained our daughter's art taped to the fridge. I felt like someone had opened a cutaway dollhouse of my life and placed it on a shelf. I took pictures with my phone until my storage filled up and then I deleted all the photos of cabinet jobs to make more room for evidence of the most important build I had never planned. In a binder was a copy of a notary acknowledgement for something else, an LLC formation for a property management entity with a name so bland it hurt. The registered address matched the P.O. box on the credit report. The other man's name appeared with a signature I could trace with my eyes, the same leftward slant as the forged HELOC signature. I googled him with the kind of rage that makes your hand steady. His LinkedIn showed a real estate agent license that had lapsed and restarted. A search result placed him at the exact gym that had charged our card. A list of addresses placed him at Auburn Oaks for 3 months last year. I sent screenshots to the folder and gave the screenshots file names like 2025-3-14 AO Gym. Little bureaucratic stabs to keep myself from falling off the map. I met with the family lawyer in Sacramento the next morning while the sun made squares on the reception floor. The receptionist poured water and asked how I was doing in a way that suggested she already knew. The attorney asked for specifics and I produced them like a magic trick with envelopes. I asked about custody and she asked whether there had been any issues with neglect or safety around our child. I described the 2:41 a.m. movements in the eco mode on the thermostat and the dog not barking. I described the DNA letter I had sent and the implant removal charge. She kept notes that looked like small rectangles of my life being reduced to nouns and dates. She told me to keep a journal as if that would tether me to some sense of time. She said that we didn't need a restraining order unless things escalated and that escalation looked different in different houses. She filed something that generated a case number that felt like exhaling after holding my breath for hours, MCF-311-25. She advised me to email my wife a clear set of boundaries that included separate finances, agreed upon pick-up and drop-off times for our daughter, and a specific clause about not introducing new partners to our child for a defined period. She said the court looked kindly on specificity. I wrote the email and sent it through my lawyer's firm portal so that it came with a masthead instead of desperation. I said accounts were frozen and that any joint expenses should be run through a shared spreadsheet I sent a link to. I included the LabCorp appointment information and a sentence about how paternity testing protected everyone, not just me. I said we needed to rotate pickup at school at the same time some alternating weeks and listed them in bullet points like a project plan. I asked for confirmation by end of day. I felt like a person making a sign to hold on the shoulder of a highway with phrases like "need ride to next town" printed carefully in block letters. At the same time, the bank fraud investigator at Wells Fargo wanted a formal statement for their file. I took a call in the Golden One parking lot, parked between a minivan with soccer decals and a landscaping truck. He asked whether I had authorized the wire. I said no. He asked whether I had signed the HELOC documents. I said no. He asked what relationship I had to the notary, and I said none, and he hummed in a way that suggested that was rare. He assigned a subcase number for the notary angle and told me that they would be contacting the UPS store for surveillance footage. The idea of a little grayscale clip of my wife and the other man at a counter whipped my stomach. He told me I should also file a report with Folsom PD to support the bank's internal process. When institutions speak in passive voice, they are telling you to generate paperwork that shelters them later. I walked into the police station and explained, and they asked me to say. A young officer with a fluorescent highlighter asked for dates and amounts and names. He asked whether this was also a domestic matter, and I said that a marriage contains multitudes. He told me to keep copies of everything and gave me a case number printed on cardstock 25-19,756. He asked whether there had been any threats or physical altercations, and I said no. He asked whether there were children, and I said yes, and he made a face I later recognized as a micro-expression of empathy his training probably tried to sand down. He told me to take care of myself, and I almost laughed. The hospital part of this mess came in sideways. I got a notification from the Kaiser app because I'm listed as an emergency contact for my wife even though her primary care is not through Kaiser. The notification referenced a clinic visit months earlier for a contraceptive implant removal. The note included a line about birth control counseling that included a bullet point that sounded like an open door. I couldn't unread it. I thought of the late nights and the smell and the way her hand had been on her stomach twice in the last few weeks with a distracted tenderness I had mistaken for cramps. Would you demand the test now or wait for the kid's sake? That question felt like a knife wrapped in cotton. The next week I got a call back from an HR person at Mercy General who had been polite but distant when I emailed about verifying my wife's shifts for a narrow window around the notary time. The email had been crafted carefully with the lawyer's help to avoid sounding like a jealous spouse fishing for gossip. The HR person said that she couldn't discuss schedules without authorization but then said, after a pause, that the unit had been closed to overtime that week due to census. She said this as if reading off a memo she wasn't sure she should be reading. Sometimes the kindest people break rules in small ways because the rules were designed for litigation, not for truth. It lined up with the notary. It lined up with the BMW. It lined up with the cologne. The independent confirmation started to stack. The UPS store owner called Wells Fargo's investigator, who relayed to me that the surveillance footage, while slightly obstructed by a customer standing at the greeting card rack, captured enough of the notary counter to show a man signing with my name while my wife stood behind him. The babysitter forwarded a photo she'd taken of the BMW when she first saw it because she liked the rims and wanted to show her boyfriend the photo at time and date metadata. The fast track now showed a crossing of the Cockrunners Bridge on a Thursday at 3:04 a.m. using our Highlanders transponder. The plate photo didn't include faces but included the corner of a hoodie I recognized. The storage unit's contract had her signature, her name, her email with a dot inserted in her maiden name like a smuggled note. My denial was running out of places to sit. In the middle of this, our daughter got a fever. She laid on the couch under a dinosaur blanket while a cartoon looped in the background, and I measured her forehead and did the math for alternating acetaminophen and ibuprofen like I've done before. She asked whether her mom was at work, and I said yes because technically she was at work somewhere. The pressure in my chest made me lean on the kitchen counter and look out at the back fence like a lookout. I texted my wife and told her to come by at 6 for a handoff. She responded coordinates rather than words. I arranged the handoff like a hostage exchange in a parking lot where I could count witnesses. I carried our daughter to her car seat and kissed the top of her head. My wife said something like a script read at a table read, and I nodded like an extra. I watched the Highlander leave and wanted to scream. In the days that followed, more reveals unfolded in a rhythm that made me wonder whether my life had always been this intricate and I had just been too tired to look. The Auburn Oaks leasing office confirmed in a cheerful voice that they had 2 applicants on file with those names and had a note about an addendum to remove 1 occupant 2 months earlier. The gym manager in Roseville said I could freeze the membership but only if the original signer came in with ID, and then said, after a pause, that the guy attached to the membership often forgets his landlord and asks them to look him up by phone number, which he provided casually as if telling me the weather. That phone number pulled up a photo from our storage turret of a birthday dinner at a restaurant which my wife had told me was with colleagues. I had processed that weeks ago as harmless. Context changes everything. The worst reveal came soft. I found an email thread on an old iPad we had since given to the kid for ABC gains. The email app auto-grabbed a set of backups to a Vault app that hides behind a calculator icon because we live in a world where people want to hide things behind arithmetic. I opened it and found screenshots of chats from an encrypted app where names might as well be placeholder text. The content wasn't lurid, I had half expected that. It was logistics. Utilities transferred. A list of furniture purchased on Facebook Marketplace. Photos of a hand with my wife's nail polish holding keys to mailbox. Messages about shift swaps tracked with a level of precision I recognize from how I schedule installs. The logs were cold in the way truth is cold. I moved my things into the office and slept on the futon for a while because the bedroom had become a courtroom. I installed a latch on the office door even though it made me sad to lock a door in my own house. I put the dog's bed there and he adjusted with the kind of loyalty that breaks your heart. My lawyer filed for a temporary order addressing finances and a parenting plan, and I signed it like a person signing for a package that contained something fragile he didn't order. The document included a clause about not encumbering the home with additional liens without mutual written consent and a clause about not disposing of property. I printed 2 copies and stuck them to the fridge with magnets from Lake Tahoe. You do not know how often you look at your fridge until it becomes a bulletin board for the end of your marriage. A week later, there was a different public scene. This one took place at school pickup outside the chain-link fence where parents cluster like birds on a wire. I stood with other dads who talk about soccer and lawn care and what the Sacramento Kings might do this year. My wife walked up and stood on the other side of the fence like an exhibit in a museum. She asked for a word with a combination of stiffness and performance that made my spine ache. I said the equivalent of "please email me." She raised her voice in that way that isn't technically yelling but is designed to attract eyes. I kept my face neutral. I stated the bank's involvement, the police case number, the lawyer's matter number, and the upcoming LabCorp appointment in a voice that could have been instructing someone on how to assemble a piece of furniture. A teacher's aide, a woman who had known me from field trip chaperoning, stepped closer in a way that felt like a form of escort. The aide nodded to me later and said she'd see my daughter's face and decided she would stand there. The independent witness clause of life has many boring heroes. That night I found an envelope in the mailbox from a law office in Auburn I had never heard of. Inside was a letter informing me of a quitclaim deed someone had attempted to file with the county recorder transferring interest in Auburn property to the LLC. My name was on a line marked spouse. The letter asked me to confirm whether I had signed. I looked at the signature and thought of the notary's photo and the way the leftward slant was becoming a recurring character. I took a photo and sent it to my lawyer, who called and said with wonderful understatement that this was bold. She asked whether I wanted her to refer me to a criminal attorney for the forgery matters, and I said not yet. The moral injury of calling the mother of your child a criminal is not one I was ready to shoulder, even in facts. The DNA test day came, and I found myself pacing in the LabCorp parking lot watching people walk in and out a strip of medical offices that could have appeared in any American suburb. I watched an elderly couple hold hands. I watched a teenager in a hoodie emerge, look at his phone, and grin in that way that means his world is not collapsing. She arrived late and without a jacket on a windy day. We went inside and presented ID and signed forms. The rush swap felt like nothing and the waiting felt like months. I kept imagining 2 emails arriving, one with relief and one with Nabum. I thought about how grown men walk around with childish illusions about certainty to disappear when swabs meet envelopes. In the interval, I threw myself at my work. I installed floating shelves for a couple on Natoma Street and listened to their polite conversation about stain choices as if this were an island in a storm. I replaced a backsplash for a retired teacher and she made me lemonade and told me my corners were crisp. I posted Instagram stories of miter cuts and ambient sharp noise as if it could drown out the thoughts. People messaged me about the shelves. The algorithm doesn't care if your life is falling apart as long as your engagement rate holds steady. I shipped cabinet pulls to a client in Reno and included a handwritten note saying thank you because gratitude feels like a taut string. The DNA results arrived on a Wednesday. The email sat in my inbox with the same energy a fire alarm has in the seconds before the blare. I opened it and skimmed to the conclusion because I am still human. Probability of paternity greater than 99.9%. My legs almost went out under me in relief like a cartoon character, and then I cried, which I didn't expect to do, because relief wears grief shoes sometimes. I thought of all the nights I had stared at her sweeping face and hated myself for the thought passing through. I drove to Lambie Park and sat on the bleachers and watched kids practice soccer and felt an ache under my ribs that was complicated and therefore honest. I told my lawyer and she said that this simplifies one thing and leaves the rest. She sounded kind. My wife responded to the boundaries email 3 days later with a tone that made me wish for silence. She objected to the LabCorp process as humiliating and argued that the bank would reverse the wire eventually. She asked for access to the locked accounts for groceries. I sent gift cards for groceries through the portal and a spreadsheet tab for expenses and felt like the kind of man who is a villain in someone else's story. She asked to explain in person and I repeated that I preferred email. She came by one evening and stood on the porch and pressed the doorbell. The Ring camera captured my hand hovering over the knob and then dropping. The thumbnail now sits in the app next to the thumbnail of her car leaving at 2:41 a.m. The timeline of 2 decisions you can see but not reverse. The lawyer filed a petition for temporary orders on finances and set a hearing date. I completed a parenting class required by the court, sitting in a room with other men and women who looked like furniture left out in the rain. We nodded along to a social worker explaining feelings with the vocabulary of a 3rd grade classroom. I learned that you can disagree without traumatizing your kid if you stick to scripts and avoid character judgments. I came home and printed the script and stuck it on the fridge next to the other papers. The fridge became a lighthouse of grim instructions. The bank's investigator called to tell me that the notary had out of caution reported the incident to the Secretary of State and that the UPS store owner had revoked notary privileges on site pending investigation. It is a strange thing to know that a Freddy Tuckett has pulled something away from someone else. I don't delight in collateral damage. I told the investigator I didn't want to ruin anyone's life, I just wanted mine back. He said he understood. He said the wire would likely not be reversible, but that civil remedies existed. Civil remedies sound like someone in a suit patting you on the shoulder and showing you a basement full of paperwork where nothing lies but you can hear everything. He assigned another number to the file and promised me a letter. In the second week after the birthday party, my mother-in-law came by with a Tupperware of soup and a face like someone who had forgotten how to smile. She set the container down and looked at the documents on the fridge and then at my face and then at our daughter's crayons in a jar and did a calculation I couldn't read. She said she didn't understand, but she understood that it hurt. She said that her daughter was not herself. She said a sentence about nurses absorbing other people's pain until they have nowhere to put their own. She said that her own marriage had survived things she never thought it could and had also died once after 15 years and then ceded to a friendship. She said that time does strange decorations on grief. I listened because his voice is the only kind I can hear in this chaos. Time passed in a staccato rhythm. Groceries. Spool. Court papers. Install appointments. Emails from the lawyer with words like discovery and deposition that look like cousins of ordinary words but feel like strangers. I found the Auburn law office had filed a notice of withdrawal from the quitclaim after my lawyer sent them a letter with a forged notary photo. The man's name popped up in a Google alert attached to a traffic ticket, a mundane entry that comforted me because it meant he was not a suspected but a person who forgets to update his registration or miscalculates a yellow light. The storage unit rent went unpaid and a lien sale notice arrived like an omen. I paid the past due and transferred the account to protect the contents for reasons I don't fully understand. Maybe I wanted a record, or maybe I wanted a place to visit when I wanted to upset myself on purpose. I started running at dawn along the bike path near the American River. My feet found a cadence my head couldn't. The trees arched in a tunnel and the air tasted like cold eucalyptus some mornings and dust other mornings. I passed the same man every few days walking a small dog that wore a sweater, and we nodded as if acknowledging we were both in some kind of quiet club. I tried to pray but instead made lists in my head of the day's tasks. Lists calmed me. I added items that looked like sentences from a different life. Replace filter in HVAC. Recop tub. Ask lawyer about Q-draw for retirement accounts. Schedule dentist for kid. Buy birthday gift for classmate from Target. Call bank. File taxes. It's strange to live a life that looks normal from space and chaotic from 2 feet away. My lawyer asked me whether I wanted to pursue charges for the forgery. I said I wanted the bank to be made whole and the house to be safe. She said those wants might be incompatible without a fight. I said I didn't want to be the person who put handcuffs on the mother of my child by proxy. She said district attorneys don't do poetic interpretations. I asked whether not pressing now would help me later and she looked at me like a doctor delivering choices. I said I would wait and focus on the civil side. She said the civil side is just a different shape of the same wound. She taught me the word partition in the context of finances and I tried to learn it in my bones. I rearranged the house. I moved the corkboard calendar out of the hallway and into the office. I put our daughter's art up there instead of schedules. I removed frames from the walls that contained photos I wasn't ready to see and put them in a box in the closet with the dog leash we used when he was a puppy. I ate standing up a lot. The house felt both too big and too small. That's the thing about grief, it alters scale like a bad lens. I don't know whether it matters to anyone else, but one night I opened the Ring app and scrolled back to the first clip after the bank call. I watched it again. The exhaust fogged the cold air, the taillights got a sickle of red. The camera's auto-exposure breathed in and out. Somewhere a neighbor's sprinkler hissed. The floodlight created a hard edge of the concrete that made our garage door look like theater scenery. I watched the car reverse, pause, then head down the driveway. I thought about how many exits a life contains that we never see, and how many entrances get staged when people want to prime you for a narrative. I set the phone down and stared into the dark backyard where the fence meets the trees, where the line blows into the little strip of woods behind our lot. In the morning, a hawk sometimes sits on that fence and looks annoyed at me like I'm a trespasser. My daughter asked me last night whether we were all still a family. I told her yes because it's a word that breaks into pieces you can rearrange as needed. I told her we would always be her parents and that she would always have a house and a room with stars on the ceiling and a dog who thinks she is his live mate. She accepted this and then asked for a snack because children are sanity. I made peanut butter toast and cut it into triangles because for some reason that helps. I don't know where this ends and I'm not interested in a neat bow. Sometimes in the early morning, before the sky has decided what colour to be, I stand at the slider and the backyard looks like a rectangle of trees leading into the little strip of woods behind our fence. The Ring camera status light glows faintly. The dog gets up and sits next to me. I listen for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on Blue Ravine and the flutter of a bird I haven't learned to name. In the reflection, I see the kitchen, the magnets on the fridge, the neat print of case numbers and dates, the stubborn block letters of boundary emails, the little drawing of our family with 3 stick figures holding hands under a big sun. Outside, at the edge of the frame, the trees look like they are holding their breath. And some mornings I think the past is about to ring the bell at 2:41 a.m. again, and some mornings I think nobody will ever come up that driveway again, and some mornings I know both can be true. Would you forgive a person who rearranged your life with a pen, or would you treat forgiveness as just another word that means we don't have to think too hard for a while? I don't have that answer, and the house doesn't either. The Ring camera keeps its own counsel. The footage shows a car leaving into the dark, then nothing but trees at the edge of a suburban lot absorbing whatever you project onto them, the way trees have done for people far more lost and far more certain than me.